We are here on Stribling's New York on WOR 710 AM iHeartMedia on your digital dial in New York City. We're discussing mortgages with Melissa Cohn of MC Home Loans. I'm always amazed by Melissa's knowledge. She is a pioneer in the field of mortgages and an expert. So we're going to... Hello, Melissa. Welcome.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me.
I'm yammering on so much I forgot to say hello to you. We're going to talk today about something that I think none of us know enough about, be they a broker themselves or a potential buyer of homes, apartments, condominiums, co-ops, which is the application process. I'm sure also one of the great reasons that you always have your phone number available. What happens when somebody calls you? Walk me through the process.
Well, when they call, I pick up the phone. So
Which I've experienced. I always say that.
At any rate, when someone calls me for the first time, the most important thing that I need to understand is sort of get the landscape of who they are financially, their income, how much liquidity they have in cash, stocks, bonds, retirement funds, how is their credit, and do they have any other debts outstanding, so that I get a sense of who they are financially and what they would be able to qualify for. But at the same time, especially in our marketplace, it's really important to understand the collateral for the mortgage, meaning knowing the building. Is this a co-op that has been approved by Fannie Mae? Is this a condominium that meets today's guidelines? Because especially in New York, every different building has a different set of their own, financial profile. Are they running at a deficit? Do they have members that are late in making their monthly maintenance or common charge payments? Do they have not enough cash in order to meet, the Fannie Freddie guidelines? So it's very important to understand the building, because in some sense in New York it's almost harder to get a building approved than it is to get the borrower approved. And my job is to try to find a way where I can put both of the worlds together and understand what kind of product that I can begin to offer to that borrower that makes sense for them.
Well, explain that a little bit further too about the buildings. I think that you brought up a really, really key point.
Well, as I just said, every co-op condo building is different. There are some buildings where, for example, Fannie and Freddie allow anywhere between 20 and 30% of the building to have commercial space. We have many, especially many of our newer buildings, that have, up to 50% of the building in commercial space, be it offices, be it a hotel, be it health clubs, because that has made more financial sense for the building. We also have buildings that are part rental and part condominium, and many buildings are unique. And when Fannie Freddie issued their guidelines on co-ops and condos, they were taking it from a national perspective and not from a New York metro perspective. So that we have to work hard to, fit our buildings into, basically what were nationally meant to be guidelines. And things such as the commercial square footage, if there's still a sponsor, what percentage of the building does the sponsor still own? Are there still rent-stabilized, rent-controlled tenants in the building? There's so many different variables about the building. And even if something doesn't meet Fannie Freddie guidelines, it doesn't mean that it's a bad building. It just means it's a building that doesn't meet guidelines. And there are plenty of, what we consider to be the best co-op and condos that don't meet guidelines for their own quirky reason. The good news is that, of course, we have all of the big banks who follow Fannie Freddie guidelines in order to be able to offer financing. But most importantly in New York are the portfolio lenders that we have who lend their own money and have created their own guidelines as it regards to qualifying a building, which are much more, related to the New York marketplace, meaning allowing 49% of the building to be commercial, being willing to come into a new building where the building is only 25% sold, in order to help people get, competitive financing in what are perfectly fine buildings but just don't meet national guidelines or standards.
Oh, when we were in our production meeting, our two producers, Tony Simone and Joe Tettleman, were saying beforehand how you take things that people don't understand or complexities of the mortgage business and explain them for the masses, for the hoi polloi. So one of the things that people really do, if you talk about Fannie and Freddie, they think it's their aunt and uncle who are originally from Brooklyn and moved to Florida.
Exactly.
So what can you give me like the broad strokes and the succinct analysis of how we can explain what they do and how they affect the market?
Well, I think it's very simple. Is that and everyone reads everywhere that my Aunt Fanny and Uncle Freddie have guidelines, and especially when you go to a big bank, everyone talks about the fact that we have to meet these national standardized guidelines for the building. And for me, what I try to explain to someone is you need to understand your building. This is why they don't meet Fannie or Freddie guidelines, and this is why it shouldn't make a difference to you because the building is in New York City. I mean, if you think about it, Olympic Tower, one of the first condominiums, or maybe not the first, but the first built with half commercial and then half residential condos on top of it, would never meet Fannie Freddie guidelines. Yet almost every portfolio bank in the city understands that it is a great condominium, and they are willing to finance that in spite of what is going on with the commercial percentage in the building. So my job is to help people understand that New York, we're different. We're a more sophisticated marketplace, and we need to understand, the nuances and complexities of our building. It doesn't mean that the buildings are bad buildings. It just means that they are different than what you're going to find in Ohio or Chicago.
You mentioned something earlier that piqued my interest because I live in this kind of building. I live in a building with approximately 400 units. 200 of them are rental and 200 of them are condops. So how will that affect somebody buying in a building like that?
Well, there are many different nuances, and I can go into much greater detail. But for example, when you look at a building that is part rental and part condop, co-op, or condo, the first thing the bank will look at is whether or not the two, while it's all in one building, whether the co-op and then the rental part have separate entrances. Do they have any shared amenities? Do they share a budget? If they don't, and they're both completely separate, then it's much easier to get financing. And there are actually some Fannie Freddie banks that would even consider that because although it's built in one physical structure, that they operate independently without, common usage, common entrances, and that makes it easier. But, once again, that's something that, it's my job to say, this is where we can go to get that done. This is going to be the best rate. I think the biggest issue that we come across is that some of these portfolio lenders don't necessarily offer the best 30-year fixed rate. And with interest rates so low today and people wanting fixed rates, they may have to make a concession and, for example, look for a 10-year adjustable versus a 30-year fix in order to get a competitive rate in a building that doesn't meet national guidelines.
A couple of other questions I'm just thinking about people that ask me, and since I know nothing about mortgages, I always refer them to you, of course, but if somebody calls you and says, how long is the whole process going to take?
Oh, your lifetime, I would say. No, the answer is that in today's post-trib world, that if you are purchasing, that you should be able to get the closing accomplished in 60 days. With the new guidelines, which require that we send out disclosures and have a waiting period before we can actually order the appraisal or get final documentation, and that's typically slowed the process down by, I would say, a week to 10 days. But there's no reason why you can't get a commitment letter on a property that you're looking for in 2 to 3 weeks. I even have banks that once we get through the disclosure process, will give you a commitment letter in 24 hours. And then it's a question of the ability, once you have your loan approval, there'll be conditions to that commitment letter satisfying those conditions, and then taking it to the closing table. If a seller is away and we can't get access to the apartment quickly, the slowdown of the appraisal can cause a slowdown in getting the commitment letter.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I made a note on this. You reminded me because I can't find my notes now. Go into some detail on the commitment letter and what exactly that means, because people are like, yes, I have a commitment letter, or I need a commitment letter. How much impact, how valuable is that and how important is that?
Well, the commitment letter is obviously the key part to the application process. Once we've determined what bank we are going to take our client to, we then complete the application, which we do over the phone, and gather all the information on their name, their address, where they work, how much they make, their balance sheet. And then we actually, in today's lovely world of technology, we transmit the application and the disclosures to them electronically. If they're, facile on email, and 99% of our people are. Once we send them the application to sign, we ask them to provide us with proof of their information, proof of their income, proof of their assets. If they have a mortgage, getting copies of maintenance statements, mortgage statements, real estate taxes, and they provide us with all this information, and we get the appraisal done. Once we have everything, the file gets underwritten for final approval. Once the loan is approved, a commitment letter is issued, which is a commitment from the lender stating that they are approved for the financing subject to the following conditions. And conditions can generally be that we need an updated bank statement, or if someone was selling a property, proof that that property is in contract, or any information that was provided that would show that there would be a change prior to closing. Once we satisfy those conditions, then the file is cleared to close, and then it's just a matter of going to the closing table. Now, as you know, in New York with co-ops and condos, there is an application process that the buyer needs to make to the building in order to get the approval to be able to close, and that once again can also slow down the process. So it's important to know that we can get, you close in a short period of time, but there are a lot of other people that are involved in the transaction, and if they're not ready to move quickly, then that will help slow down the process for the buyer. And we all know that everyone wants everything yesterday, but getting the cooperation of all the different parties sometimes doesn't make it yesterday. It can mean it's next week or even the week after.
Well, that was really interesting and very, very, very helpful. Thank you again for joining us this week, Melissa Cohn of MC Home Loans at 844-667-7300. We will see or hear you again soon.
Thanks so much, Rob.
Okay.
Love being on your show.
As usual, yes, me too.
Bye.